My name is Nora Whitfield. I'm 35, and I hold the rank of Major in the United States Army. The day before my little sister's wedding, my parents phoned to tell me I wasn't welcome, that I didn't count as real family. My sister had already beaten them to it with a text an hour before. She wrote that I was cut from the guest list, that the day was reserved for people who actually belonged. I just spent 13 hours in the air, flying in from a base on the other side of the world, all for that wedding. When my mother heard how I responded, she laughed. She announced to the whole room that I was full of hot air, that I'd never once caused a scene, and that come sunrise I'd be crawling back like I always did. She wasn't laughing the next morning when the venue's phone rang. Before I walk you through what actually went down, do me a small favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help. And leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, your city, and the time on your clock right now. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the day I flew home believing I was finally rejoining my family. Here's the thing you have to understand about being the one who walked away. In our house, leaving was the unforgivable crime, and I committed it at 19. My dad, Dale, ran a small machine shop, and he'd already sketched out the rest of my life for me. I was supposed to stay put, learn the work, take the business over one day, and keep the Whitfield name welded to that little town forever. Instead, 3 weeks after I graduated, I walked into a recruiter's office and put my name on the line. He froze me out for a solid year after that. When he finally spoke to me again, all he said was, "You chose them." He never finished the thought. He didn't have to. I carried that half-finished sentence around for 15 years, 3 deployments, 2 continents. A long, grinding climb from enlisted soldier to officer through OCS. The rank on my collar cost me plenty. And through every bit of it, I kept sending money back home. I covered the second mortgage in 2018 when the shop nearly went under. I quietly wiped out around $9,000 of my parents' credit card, debt the winter my mom's car finally died on her. I wired cash for birthdays, chipped in for my sister's training program, paid for a whole new furnace one bitter January. I kept telling myself that's just what a good daughter does when she can't be there in person. I told myself the checks were a kind of language, one my family would eventually learn to read. So when I flew home that week, I was genuinely happy. My dress uniform was folded neatly in my garment bag. I honestly believed that 15 years of showing up the only way I could would finally add up to something. What I was about to find out was exactly what all that effort had bought me. It bought me a folding chair I never even got to sit in. Nobody came to the airport. I rented a car and drove the 35 minutes to my parents' place, then let myself in through a door that used to just be open. Now it had a keypad, and I'd had to text my mother to get the code. Diane was on her phone when I stepped inside. She threw up one hand, palm out, the classic "not right now" signal. She was deep in a conversation about napkin shades and whether the Colemans would judge them for going with ivory over eggshell. My sister Kayla gave me the kind of hug you'd give a coworker at a farewell party. Just arms, no actual pull behind it. My garment bag never even left the hall closet. Twice that afternoon a relative dropped by, spotted me, and said with real surprise, "Oh, Nora's home on leave." And both times I watched my mother brush it aside. "Oh, she's always tied up with her army stuff, you know how she is." Like me being there was some kind of scheduling glitch. I stood in the kitchen I grew up in and understood something with the same cold clarity I usually save for a mission briefing. I wasn't a daughter coming home for a visit. I was a guest who'd shown up too early and lingered too long. When I offered to lend a hand with the seating chart, my mother didn't even glance up. Don't turn this weekend into the Nora show. I hadn't said one word about myself. I'd offered to fold place cards. But that was the unspoken rule in that house, the one nobody wrote down and everyone still followed. Me wanting anything, even the chance to help, somehow stole something from Kayla. So I filled a glass with water and kept my mouth shut. And the quiet settled over me in a way that felt way too familiar. That should have been my first warning. There was exactly one exception to all of it, and his name was Uncle Hank. My great uncle, 80 years old, a Vietnam combat vet with a grip like a bench vice and absolutely no tolerance for nonsense. When I came back into the living room, he was the only one who got to his feet. He wrapped both of his hands around mine and held on a beat longer than a handshake, the way old soldiers do when they're quietly making sure you're really standing there in front of them. "There she is," he said. "The Major." He said the word like it had actual weight to it, because to him it did. We ended up sitting together in a corner while the rest of the house circled around Kayla like she was the sun. Hank reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, the edges rubbed smooth from years of handling. It was the twin of the one he'd pressed into my hand the day I shipped out on my first deployment. "Still carry mine," he said. "You still got yours." I did. "I keep it in my left breast pocket, right over the seam, a habit that started during a year I don't talk about." He nodded like that was the only acceptable answer. Then he folded my fingers around his coin and held them closed. "Keep hold of this," he said, low enough that only I could catch it. "You're gonna need to remember who you are before this weekend's over." I laughed and told him it was just a wedding. He didn't laugh with me. He just turned his eyes toward the kitchen, where my mother was flipping through photos of a place I'd been hearing whispered about all afternoon. Belcrest Estate. The venue Kayla had been dreaming about for years, the one nobody in that room could explain how the Whitfields had actually landed. But I knew exactly how we'd gotten Belcrest because I was the reason. 4 months earlier, Kayla had called me overseas in tears. Belcrest was the dream, a restored officer's estate sitting on protected military heritage land. The kind of place with a wait list a mile long, a wrought iron gate, and grounds so beautiful people cry during their engagement shoots. But there was a catch, and it was ironclad. You couldn't just book the place. Any event at Belcrest required an eligible service member to sponsor the reservation, sign for it, and stay on as the responsible officer of record all the way through the day of the event itself. The agreement laid it out in a clause I actually read, because I read everything I put my name to. The sponsor had to remain in good standing and be personally present. The sponsorship couldn't be transferred, and no substitute sponsor could be added within 21 days of the event. If the sponsoring officer pulled out or lost their eligibility, the whole reservation was voided automatically. No last-minute swaps, no replacement signatures, no exceptions. No sponsor meant no booking. Civilians simply could not reserve it on their own, no matter how much money they threw at it. Kayla didn't have a sponsor. I did. I was a sitting major with the membership and the standing to sign. So I said yes, the way I always said yes, fast, before anyone could remind me I wasn't wanted. I put the reservation in my name. I paid the deposit out of my own account. I signed the liability sponsorship, the page that made me the responsible officer of record. "I'll sponsor it," I told her, "but the booking has to be under my name. That's just how the whole thing works." And Kayla, 27 and already only half listening, said, "Sure, whatever, thank you so much," and never read a single line of what she was thanking me for. Nobody in my family read it. To them, Belcrest just materialized out of thin air, a gift from the universe. Proof that the Whitfields had finally become the kind of family that got the nice things. But to me, it was a signature. My signature. That entire glittering dream was balanced on one name, and the name was mine. That evening, we all had dinner with the Colemans. Ethan, the groom, and his parents, Frank and Sandra. Frank was a retired Marine, built like a guy who's never skipped a single workout, polite in that measured way people get when they've spent years giving orders. Sandra was warm but watchful, and it was obvious she was quietly sizing up the family her son was about to marry into. The conversation swung to the venue fast, the way it always did, and my father leaned back in his chair and took full ownership of it. "We pulled a few strings to lock down Belcrest," Dale said. "Family's got some connections." Sandra practically glowed. "Your family has real reach, Dale. That place is impossible to get." I opened my mouth. I don't even remember what I was going to say. Maybe just the boring, plain truth. but under the table my father's shoe came down hard on mine, on purpose. Later, out in the hallway, he grabbed my elbow. "Don't you dare embarrass us in there." So I sat, and I ate, and I let him wear my work like a jacket that just happened to fit him. The worst part wasn't even the lie. It was how smoothly my mother backed him up on it. When Sandra gently asked whether the Whitfields might want any help with the costs, Diane pressed a hand to her chest, offended on principle. "Oh, we don't need anybody's charity. We're doing just fine." And she said it staring straight at me. "We're doing just fine." I'd wired her grocery money back in March. I said nothing. I'd gotten really, really good at saying nothing in that house, and I'd made the mistake of thinking silence was strength. It wasn't. It was a slow surrender I'd been signing off on, one quiet check at a time. Kayla found me out on the back porch that night. For a second, I thought maybe she'd come to say thank you, or just to sit with me the way we used to before all the distance crept in. Instead, she lit a cigarette she didn't want her fiancé to know about and said the thing she'd clearly been sitting on for years. "Do you have any idea what it's like?" she said. "Growing up as your sister." I waited. "Every holiday, every dinner, how's Nora? Where's Nora stationed now? Is Nora safe? Your sister's a hero. And I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who's actually here, and I still come in second to some woman on the far side of the planet." I told her I never once asked to be the topic of conversation. "You don't have to ask," she shot back. "You just have to walk through the door." Then she got to what she really wanted. "Just don't wear the uniform tomorrow. Wear a dress like everybody else. The second you put on those greens, the whole thing turns into the Nora show. And this is my day. One day, just let me have one." And because I loved her, and because I'd spent my whole life shrinking down to make room in that family, I said yes. I'd wear a dress. I'd leave the uniform zipped up in the closet. I'd make myself small enough to fit their idea of what a sister was supposed to be. I told myself it was generous. That was mistake number 2. Mistake number 1 had been believing the checks were love. Mistake number 2 was agreeing to vanish and offering to do it for free. After that, the exclusions came faster, small and precise. At the rehearsal dinner, there was no chair for me at the head table. "We ran out of space," my mother said, waving me toward a folding chair near the kitchen door, right next to a cousin's shrieking toddler. When the photographer rounded everyone up for family portraits, Kayla called out names, and mine wasn't one of them. "Just the people Kayla grew up with," Diane clarified, like I'd been raised in some other household. I stepped out of the shot, stood against the wall, and watched my family arrange themselves into a picture that had no room for me in it. And I kept my face perfectly flat, because reacting was the one thing I'd trained completely out of myself. I called Marissa from the parking lot. Captain Marissa Vaughn, my closest friend in the Army, the one person who'd watched me hold a perimeter under fire without my voice so much as wavering. She listened to all of it. The table, the photos, the keypad on the front door. "Nora," she said, "that's not a family. That's a chain of command that never once put you up for a single promotion." I laughed, but it caught in my throat. "You'd absolutely lose it if a unit treated one of your soldiers like this," she said. "You'd write somebody up over it." And she was right. I'd defend a total stranger in my command harder than I'd ever defended myself in that house. I told her I'd handle it the way I handle everything, by absorbing it and pushing forward. She went quiet for a second. Then she said the thing I wasn't ready to hear. "Absorbing it isn't handling it, Nora. It's just bleeding where nobody can see the wound." I confronted my father the next morning. Not a big scene. I don't do scenes. I just tracked him down in the garage and told him I'd noticed I wasn't on the seating chart or in any of the photos, and I asked him straight out what was going on. He didn't look up from his workbench. "You left," he said. "You don't get to come back and take charge." I told him I wasn't trying to take charge of anything. "You being here is enough," he said. "You fill up the whole room without opening your mouth, always have." I asked him what that was even supposed to mean. He set down his wrench. "It means this is Kayla's weekend, and every time somebody looks at you, it's not." Short sentences, fired off fast, like rounds. I kept my voice level. "I flew across the world for this." He shrugged. "Nobody asked you to." And then, because I was tired, I said the one true thing I never should have wasted on him. Dad, the army is the only reason Kayla has Bellcrest at all. He finally looked at me, and he laughed, short, ugly, dead certain. Don't flatter yourself, Nora. You always did think the whole world spins on you. I let it slide. I walked out of that garage with my boot heels striking the concrete in a steady, even rhythm. The cadence I marched to, the one that keeps my hands quiet. And I thought he has no clue what he just laughed at. He thought I was showing off. I was telling him the truth. And the truth was the only weapon in that room, and he just dared me to use it. That night, I sat on the edge of a motel bed. I'd already moved out of my parents' house by then, told them I needed to be closer to the airport, which was half true, and I called Marissa again. I didn't cry. I want to be really clear about that, because people expect this whole soldier comes home to a cruel family story to end with me sobbing into a pillow, and that's just not what happened. I sat completely still and talked myself through it out loud, the way you work a problem with someone who won't let you lie. I keep doing the same thing, I told her. I pay, I sponsor, I fix the furnace, I cover the debt. Like if I just complete enough tasks, run enough resupply, eventually I stopped. Eventually they'll what? Marissa said. Promote you to daughter. I didn't answer. Nora, you're running supply convoys to people who blow the bridge the second you're across it. You don't have a family problem. You've got a mission you can't win because the objective was never real to begin with. I turned Hank's coin over in my fingers while she talked, my thumb tracing the worn eagle on the face of it, the way I used to before a bad day. For 15 years, I'd believed that providing was the same as belonging, that logistics could somehow buy what affection was holding back. Sitting in that motel room, I finally saw the math clearly. And the math was brutal and simple. You cannot purchase a seat at a table that refuses to set a place for you. All you can do is keep paying for a meal you'll never be invited to eat. I set the coin down on the nightstand. I had a decision to make, and for the first time all weekend, I wasn't afraid of it. I almost didn't go through with it. That's the part I'm not proud of. The morning before the wedding, I drove out to Bellcrest to do the final liability walkthrough. My duty as the sponsoring officer, the last box to check before I could fly home and write the whole trip off as a draw. The estate was every bit as gorgeous as Kayla had always described. Limestone columns, a garden turning gold around the edges, string lights strung up in the trees just waiting for dusk. Carol Bennett, the events director, met me at the gate with a clipboard and a warm, professional smile. Everything's locked in under your sponsorship, Major, she said, walking me through the floor plan, the vendor arrival windows, the emergency exits. I was signing off to keep the whole thing clear. I initialed every page. I shook her hand. I stood alone for a moment in the empty ballroom, picturing my sister walking through it. And I made myself a quiet promise to get through the next 48 hours without incident. Wear the dress. Sit at the kitchen door table. Clap when I was supposed to. Fly home. Mission complete. I drove back to the motel telling myself the worst was already behind me. I grabbed some dinner, tucked Hank's coin back into my breast pocket out of pure habit, and was halfway through a sad little motel salad when my phone buzzed on the comforter at 9:14 p.m. Kayla's name lit up the screen. I almost let it sit there. Some animal part of me already knew that whatever was in that message was going to end something, and for one honest second I considered just not looking. Then I picked it up and read it. The text said I was out, that the day was only for real family, and that clearly wasn't me. Just a couple of short lines. I read them twice, not because I didn't get it, but because I got it completely on the first pass. I called Kayla back. It went to my parents instead. She'd handed off the phone, or they'd taken it from her, because when the line connected it was on speaker and I could hear the kitchen behind them, the clink of the rehearsal cleanup. My father spoke first. It's better this way, Nora. My mother right on his heels, sharp and rehearsed. Don't make a scene, you always make a scene. I told her calmly that I had never once made a scene in my life, which was simply a fact. There was a pause. Then Dale delivered the line he'd obviously been saving, the one he thought would finish me off. Real family shows up for each other, you just sent checks. And there it was. All 13 hours of my flight, all 15 years of wiring money home, the furnace and the mortgage and the debt, every bit of it folded up and handed right back to me as proof that I'd never really been there at all. I didn't argue. Arguing was exactly what they wanted. It would have confirmed the whole story they'd already fed everyone. The difficult absent daughter throwing a tantrum. So I stayed quiet for a moment. And in that silence, I heard my mother say to somebody else in the room, not even bothering to muffle the phone, "She'll cave, she always does." That one sentence is what settled it for me. Not the cruelty, the certainty. They were that convinced I was harmless. I sat there with the phone in my hand and did the thing I'm trained to do, the thing that has kept me and the people I'm responsible for alive. I stopped feeling and started assessing. What did I control? What was the terrain? What was the single decisive action available to me? I called Marissa and laid it all out in 90 seconds. Flat, no commentary, she didn't hesitate for a beat. "Nora, you're the sponsoring officer of record. The reservation exists on your signature. No sponsor, no event. That's not revenge. That's the standing policy you signed under. You wouldn't be doing anything to them. You'd be doing one thing to a document." I knew she was right, because I'd read every line of that liability page when nobody else in my family had bothered to read a word of it. I could not stay the responsible officer for an event I'd been formally barred from attending. That wasn't even a moral question. It was a procedural impossibility. I texted Kayla back a single line. "Understood. Real family can pay for the venue themselves." Then I set the phone down on the comforter and waited. 40 seconds later, my mother's name lit up the screen. "Stop bluffing, Nora. It's pathetic." I stared at that word, pathetic, the one they'd been quietly pinning on me all weekend, and I felt absolutely nothing move inside me. No anger, no hurt. Just the clean, cold focus I get when a decision's already made and all that's left is the execution. I didn't reply to her. I picked Hank's coin up off the nightstand, slid it back into my breast pocket where it belonged, and set an alarm for 6. At 6:30 the next morning, the morning of the wedding, I called the Bellcrest events line. Carol picked up on the second ring, already at work the way good coordinators always are before dawn on an event day. "This is Major Whitfield," I said. "I'm formally withdrawing my sponsorship and authorization for today's event, effective immediately." There was a short, professional pause, the sound of a woman pulling up a file and grasping what it meant faster than most people would. "Major, I want to confirm you understand what this means." "I do," I said. "Without an eligible sponsor, the booking can't be held and the party isn't authorized to be on the grounds." "That's correct," she said. "I'll need it in writing as well. It'll be in your inbox in 5 minutes." I sent the email before I even finished my coffee. Short, dated, unmistakable, the kind of paper trail you learn to leave behind when your signature carries real weight. Then I stood up and noticed the sound my own boots made on the cheap motel tile. That steady, even cadence again, the one that means I've stopped arguing with myself. I wasn't shaking. My voice hadn't moved once during the entire call. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt like I'd finally completed the right mission instead of the one I'd been assigned. If you've ever been the one who paid, who served, who showed up from the far side of the world and still got told you weren't really family, I genuinely want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments and subscribe, because in about 3 hours, my mother is going to find out exactly what her bluffing daughter put her name to. And that phone call did not go the way she expected it to. I wasn't inside the house when the whole thing started coming apart, but Uncle Hank was, and afterward he walked me through it in order, the way a good sergeant files a report. The night before, my mother had seen my one-word text and read it out loud to everybody in the kitchen like it was the setup to a joke. She waved the phone around. "Listen to this," Diane said. "Real family can pay for the venue themselves. Look at her, thinking she's so smart." Hank said my father never even glanced up from his coffee mug. "She'll fold," Dale told the room. "She always does, sends a check, says she's sorry, shows back up. You watch, she'll be on the phone apologizing before lunch, begging to come." Here's what I've made peace with about that. They weren't being dumb. They were going off the evidence. For 15 years, I'd handed them this exact pattern. Push me and I absorb it. Insult me and I open my wallet. Shut me out and I find some way to be useful anyway. Every single fight we'd ever had wrapped up the same way, with me deciding the relationship mattered more than the injury and folding myself back into whatever shape they wanted. My mother wasn't reading the forecast wrong. She was reading 15 years of data that had never let her down once. What she didn't have was the new piece. She had no clue about the motel, or Marissa's voice in my ear, or the phone call I'd already placed at 6:30 that morning. She was standing there laughing at a daughter who wasn't around anymore. And the daughter who took her place had already yanked the one thread the entire day was hanging from. Hank told me later that watching my mother laugh felt like watching somebody tap dance on a floor that had already dropped out from under them. By 8 o'clock, my mother had gotten ahead of the story with the extended family. She dropped a message in the big relatives group chat, the one with aunts and uncles and cousins going 3 branches deep. Just so everyone's clear, Nora is pouting because she's not the star of the show this weekend. Please ignore her today. She needs to grow up. Hank saw it, because Hank is somehow in every chat that exists. Nobody has ever managed to leave him out of one. He called me right away, and I could hear the grit in his voice. What did they tell the whole family, Nora? Because the story making the rounds is that you stormed off to spite your sister. So I told him the plain version, the same one I'd given Marissa. That Bellcrest only existed because I sponsored it. That the whole reservation lived on my signature. That I'd withdrawn it that morning because I couldn't legally stay the officer of record for an event I'd been thrown out of. Hank went silent for a long stretch. I could picture him at his kitchen table working his jaw. So your daddy's been out here bragging to Frank Coleman about his connections, he finally said. And the connection is the kid he tossed out the door last night. That's pretty much it. Another pause. Then, low and steady, the voice of a man who'd guarded worse secrets than this one and had decided he was done guarding this one. They don't have the first idea what's about to hit them, do they? I told him I wasn't planning anything. I just pulled my name. The rest was just physics. Sometimes physics is plenty, Hank said. And I understood from the iron in his tone that whatever went down in that hall, my great-uncle was not going to sit there quietly and let a lie get crowned. Kayla was running her own operation in a different chat, the bridesmaids. A dozen women locked and loaded to protect the bride from anything that might dent her happiness. She screenshotted my understood text and posted it with a caption. The drama queen finally backed out, best wedding present ever. The replies rolled in like a party. Laughing faces, little confetti toss animations. Good riddance. She always has to make everything about herself. One of the bridesmaids, a woman named Paige, typed, "Wait, isn't she in the military or something? So dramatic." And Kayla, high on all that agreement, feeling for one afternoon like the main character of her own story, wrote the line that would trail her into that hall and park itself on her chest for years. She can keep her medals. We don't need her. A dozen women laughed at it. Not one of them knew that Paige also followed Marissa on Instagram, and that within the hour she'd forward the whole cheerful thread to Marissa, figuring it was just funny wedding gossip. And that Marissa would send it straight to me with 3 words. You should see this. I read she can keep her medals sitting in a motel parking lot. And I thought about the 3 deployments those medals stood for, and the names tied to one of them that I don't say out loud. And I felt the very last thread of obligation to those people go slack and drop away. Not anger. Relief. They'd told me in writing, in front of a dozen witnesses, exactly how little I was worth to them. The least I could do was take them at their word. At 20 to 10 that morning, Kayla called Bellcrest to lock down the vendor arrival times. Glowing, an hour deep into her hair appointment, still writing the group chat. Carol Bennett took the call. I know how it went because Carol told me later, apologetic, like somebody had handed her a live grenade with the pin already gone. I'm so sorry, Carol said. The event's been canceled. The sponsoring officer withdrew authorization this morning. There was dead air on the line. Then Kayla said, the what? What sponsoring officer? Major Whitfield, Carol said. The reservation required a military sponsor. Without one, we can't host the event, and the agreement doesn't allow us to add a new sponsor this close to the date. I really am sorry. Kayla couldn't make sense of the words because nobody had ever forced her to make sense of them. She'd never read the contract. Never once asked how a family with a struggling machine shop had scored an impossible venue. Never connected the gift to the person who gave it. "My sister," she said. "My sister did this." And Carol, calm and factual. "The booking has been under Major Whitfield's name and sponsorship since the day it was made, ma'am." That was the moment the floor my mother had been dancing on finally registered as gone. Not when I sent the text. Not when I made the call. But when a stranger with a clipboard said my rank and my name and tied them to the one beautiful thing my family had. Kayla started screaming for our mother. The hairdresser later told a cousin that the bride knocked a whole tray of bobby pins to the floor, lunging for her phone. And across town, in the kitchen where she'd been so sure I'd come crawling back by noon, my mother answered a call from her daughter. And somewhere in the first 10 seconds of it, she finally quit laughing. My mother called Bellcrest 4 times in 20 minutes. She tried sweet, then desperate, then furious. "There's been an awful mistake. My daughter is getting married there today. We have 100 guests." Carol held the line with the unshakable politeness of a woman who has told crying mothers no before. "Ma'am, I understand, and I'm sorry. Without an eligible sponsor, we can't host a civilian event on these grounds, and the signed agreement doesn't allow a new sponsor to be added within 21 days of the date. There's no one I can put in this morning. This isn't a rule I have the power to waive." My father grabbed the phone and tried volume, because volume was the only tool he'd ever really trusted, and volume accomplished exactly nothing. They called 3 other venues, on a Saturday in wedding season, with 5 hours' notice. Everywhere the answer was the same polite impossibility. The only place in town that could hold 100 people on no notice was the VFW Post Hall over on Delmer Street. A low brick building with a faded flag out front, folding tables, a kitchen that had soaked up decades of fish fries, and a brass plaque by the door listing the names of servicemen who hadn't come home. They booked it because they were out of options. And somewhere in that scramble of phone calls, my father finally had to sit down with the reservation paperwork my mother pulled up, and finally read the name on the sponsorship line, and finally understand that "we pulled a few strings," and "the family's got connections" had always meant one single thing. Nora, the daughter who picked the army, the daughter who just sent checks. His connection was the child he'd thrown out the night before. And now he was standing in his kitchen holding the proof, with 100 guests already getting dressed and nowhere to put them but a veterans hall. The guests showed up at the VFW hall clutching invitations that read Bellcrest Estate. I got it all in real time. Hank texting from inside. A cousin texting from the parking lot. The story piecing itself together on my phone while I sat at a gate at the airport, flight still hours off, unable to look away. People stood out in the gravel lot holding that cream-colored card stock, staring back and forth between it and the brick building in front of them, the drooping flag, the hand-taped paper sign that read "Whitfield Coleman, this way." Sandra Coleman climbed out of her car, looked at the building, and stood frozen for a solid 10 seconds. Inside, the truth was already moving through the room because Uncle Hank had decided it would. He told a cousin, who told an aunt, who told the table next to hers. Bellcrest only happened because Nora sponsored it. The connections were a made-up story. The army daughter everybody had been told was too cold and too distant to care had quietly held the whole dream up by herself, and her own parents had thrown her out and lied about it. The room turned in slow motion, table by table, the way a crowd turns when it realizes it's been fed the wrong story about someone. And then somebody, and nobody would ever cop to who, repeated the line that had been so hilarious in the bridesmaid chat that morning. "She can keep her medals," said out loud, in a hall built to honor exactly those medals, under a brass plaque of men who died earning them with a faded service flag hanging 6 feet away. The words hit that room like something knocked over in church. People looked at the plaque. People looked at the flag. And then people started looking at the door. Frank Coleman was the one who said it to my father's face. Frank, the retired Marine, had spent the first 20 minutes in that hall the way old service members do, reading the plaque, nodding at the unit flag, comfortable among the relics in a way the civilians weren't. He'd sponsored events at halls and clubs like this one for over 2 decades. He knew exactly how a place like Bellcrest worked, because he'd done the sponsoring himself, signed the same kind of liability page. So when the story reached him, he didn't need anybody to spell it out. He walked up to my father near the makeshift bar and asked him quietly, no heat in it, the question that pulled the floor out from under the whole performance. Your daughter's a major, and you told all of us you landed Bellcrest through connections. My father started in on how it was complicated family business, how Frank wouldn't understand. Frank cut him off, still quiet, which was somehow worse than loud. I sponsored events like that for 24 years, Dale. It takes one officer's name on a line, not connections, one name. And you threw the name out last night. Then he turned and looked at Sandra, who had her hand pressed over her mouth, and he said the sentence that ended something between the two families. They lied to us about who these people even are. Sandra Coleman had signed off on this match partly because the Whitfields had seemed solid, connected, the right kind of family for her son to marry into. Now she was standing in a fish fry hall watching the connections dissolve into a lie, and you could see her doing the arithmetic in real time. Ethan, the groom, stood between his mother and his bride and looked, for the first time all weekend, like a man wondering what exactly he'd signed up for. Then Uncle Hank stood up. 80 years old, in the good suit he keeps for funerals and weddings. He crossed to the head table where my sister sat in her dress with her bouquet in her lap, and he set something down on the white cloth in front of everyone. A challenge coin. The twin of the one sitting in my breast pocket 200 miles away. He didn't shout. Hank never shouts. He just said, in a voice that carried because the whole room had gone silent waiting for it, I'd like to tell you all who my niece is, since nobody in this family seems to have bothered to find out. And he told them. 3 deployments. The climb from enlisted to officer. A commendation she'd never once mentioned at a single family dinner, earned on a day she doesn't talk about, for getting people out who wouldn't have made it home otherwise. He kept it short and he kept it true. No Hollywood, no swelling music. Just the facts laid flat on a table next to a coin. When he was done, the hall was so quiet you could hear the old window air conditioner grinding away. Kayla sat down slow, like her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her up, the bouquet crushed in both hands. My father stared off at the middle distance and wouldn't meet a single pair of eyes. Sandra took Ethan by the arm and steered him into a corner to talk low and fast. The wedding did happen, eventually. Vows in a rented hall, a sound system that crackled, a sheet cake. But nobody in that room was celebrating. They were processing. People ask me if I planned that moment. I didn't. I wasn't even in the building. I just stopped lending my name to people who decided it wasn't good enough to sit at their table. And the truth walked in on its own 2 feet and found itself a chair. Kayla called me that night. I was still stuck at the airport, my flight delayed, sitting under those buzzing fluorescent lights with Hank's coin in my palm. She didn't lead with an apology. She led with the thing she'd been told her whole life was fact. You humiliated us, she said, in front of everybody on my wedding day. I let her finish. Then I gave her the only version of events that was real. You uninvited me, Kayla. I took my name off a document I was legally responsible for. That's the entire story. Everybody's talking about you again, she said. And even then, even there, that was the wound underneath all of it. That on the one day she'd built to be all about her, the conversation had bent right back to her sister. I wasn't in the room, I said. I'm 200 miles away. Whatever they were saying, I didn't say any of it. She started to cry. The angry kind. The kind still hunting for someone else to blame. And I didn't soften the way I would have a year earlier, a week earlier, a day earlier. I'd spent 15 years softening. I heard you the first time, I said. When you told me real family belongs there and I don't, I believed you, so understood. Understood. The word I'd said to commanders for 15 years to mean I'll comply. This time it meant something completely different. It meant I've received your message and I won't be asking again. She was still talking when I said good night gently and hung up. It wasn't cruelty. It was the first clean boundary I'd ever drawn with my own blood, and it didn't feel like winning. It felt like setting down a rucksack I'd hauled so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my own body. My father called 2 days later. I almost let it ring out, but 15 years of answering the phone for these people doesn't switch off in 48 hours. He didn't say hello. You couldn't let your sister have one day, he said. I'd had 2 days to get steady, and I was. I gave her the entire venue, Dad. I sponsored it, I signed for it, I paid the deposit. You took the credit and handed my seat to somebody else. All I did was take back my own signature. Silence on the line. I could hear his shop radio in the background, the one that's been playing the same classic rock station since I was a kid. And then his voice changed. Dropped. Frayed at the edges. Lost the bark it had worn my whole life. Folks used to ask about the shop, he said. About me. Now they ask about you, the major. They've been asking about you for years, Nora, and nobody asks about me anymore. There it was. Not an apology. Dale Whitfield doesn't keep those in stock. But the truth under the cruelty finally rising to the surface. He hadn't thrown me out because I took up too much space. He'd thrown me out because my existence had turned into a yardstick for his own shrinking. And a drowning man will push down on whatever's closest just to keep his own head above water. I felt something for him in that moment, but it wasn't the old reflex to fix it. I'm not asking you to be proud of me, I said. I stopped needing that a while ago. I'm just done auditioning for it. He didn't answer. After a bit, the shop radio filled the silence, and then he hung up, and I let him. Back on base, I did the administrative work of actually leaving, which is far less dramatic than the phone calls and a whole lot more permanent. I sat down with the legal and finance offices and quietly unwound 15 years of backstopping. I took my parents off the line of credit I'd guaranteed for the shop in 2018, the guarantee that meant if Dale missed a payment, the bank came knocking on the officer with the steady paycheck and the security clearance to protect. I pulled my name off the auto-pay I'd set up for their utilities during that rough patch 4 winters back. I redid the emergency contact and financial power of attorney paperwork I'd filed before my last deployment, the one where, if I didn't come home, a chunk of my estate rooted straight to a family that wouldn't seat me at a wedding. Finance pulled the running total of what I'd sent home over the years, because I asked them to. Because I wanted to see the number with my own 2 eyes. $214,000. I looked at it for a while. I didn't feel sick and I didn't cry. I felt the way you feel closing out a deployment, signing the last form when the thing that swallowed you whole is finally, officially behind you. Then I clipped Hank's coin onto my lanyard, right next to my own where I'd see it every time I badged in. 2 coins now. His and mine. Marissa caught me doing it and didn't say anything sentimental because that's not how she's built. She just looked at the 2 coins and said, "Took you long enough, Major." And for the first time in a long while, when somebody called me Major, I heard it the way Hank meant it, like it weighed something, like it was the right name. Hank called that Sunday the way he'd call every Sunday from then on. "You holding up?" he asked. And I told him the truth, which was that I was better than I'd been in years, and that the better part was a little disorienting. He laughed his dry laugh. Then he told me something I hadn't known. Frank Coleman had asked for my number. A few days later, Frank actually used it. "Colonel to be," he said in that careful Marine cadence. "I served 24 years. I'd have been proud to stand in that hall and watch you walk in wearing your blues. For whatever it's worth, I told my son to take a long, hard look at the family he's marrying into and to remember how they treated the best person in it." I thanked him. I didn't know what else to say to a stranger who'd seen me more clearly in one afternoon than my own parents had in 35 years. Before we hung up, Frank added, "Your uncle's a good man. He didn't let them get away with it." Later, on the phone, Hank and I talked about my father because somebody had to. He's scared, not sorry, Hank said. Those aren't the same thing, and don't you go sitting around treating them like they are. I asked him if he thought Dale would ever come around. Hank went quiet, then said the truest thing anybody said to me through that whole stretch. You didn't lose a family, Nora. You just found out the real size of the one you had. Turns out it's me and that Vaughn girl and a Marine you met on a Saturday. Smaller than you figured. Realer, too. I held the phone and looked at the 2 coins on my lanyard and decided that was enough. More than, actually. In a town that small, a lie about who you are doesn't die quietly. The story of the Bellcrest sponsorship, the Army daughter thrown out, the parents who'd passed her work off as their own connections, made its slow lap through the church, the diner, the booster club, the shop's customers. Nobody confronted my parents to their faces. That's not how those towns operate. They just adjusted. The dinner invitations thinned out. At church, my mother drifted toward the back pews where the conversation was easier to dodge. The Colemans kept a cool, polite distance, the kind that says we know, and we haven't forgotten without ever putting it into words. Dale's standing at the Machinists' Association, built up over decades on being a solid, respectable family man, took a quiet hit that nobody announced and everybody understood. My mother posted something on Facebook about going through a hard season and appreciating prayers. It got a handful of obligatory likes and not one comment asking what was wrong, because everyone already knew, and knowing made them careful. I heard all of this secondhand, from Hank, from a cousin or two who'd quietly taken my side once the facts came out. I didn't gloat over any of it. I was already back in the rhythm of my actual life, 400 miles, and an ocean's worth of perspective away from that VFW hall. The consequences weren't anything I engineered. They were just what happens when you stop holding up a story that was never true. And the story, no longer load-bearing, settles to the ground under its own weight. My family had spent years telling everyone I was the one who left. They were finally finding out what it was like when I actually did. Kayla's marriage started in a hole and didn't climb out fast. Ethan had stood in that hall and watched her family treat their own blood like trash and brag about a lie. And you can't fully unsee that about the people you've married into. Sandra Coleman never really warmed to her daughter-in-law after that day. The welcome that had been waiting got trimmed down to courtesy. I heard through the cousin pipeline that the newlyweds fought about money. Kayla had counted on a certain kind of family backing that turned out to have only ever been me. And I was gone. About 3 weeks after the wedding, Kayla sent me a single text. Not an apology. A test, maybe, or a flare shot up to see if I'd answer. I know you think I deserved all of this. I read it standing in the chow line on base. I thought about a dozen replies, the kind one, the cutting one, the long one laying out everything I'd done that she'd never bothered to learn about. I chose none of them. I left it on read. Not to punish her, not as a power move, but because I genuinely wasn't ready, and I'd spent my entire life answering these people before I was ready. Performing a readiness I didn't have because the alternative felt like abandonment. I was done performing. If I responded to Kayla, it would be because I'd decided to, on my own clock, not because a buzzing phone summoned the old reflex. So I put the phone in my pocket, got my food, and ate with people who'd choose me back. 3 months later, she sent another text, a very different one, but I'll get to that. Something shifted in my career that quarter, and I think it's because something shifted in me. For years, I'd been split in two. Half my focus forward on the mission, half of it rooted back home to a family that drained the line and never once said thank you. With that second channel finally closed, I had a kind of bandwidth I'd forgotten I owned. When a command position opened up, the one I'd talked myself out of wanting because it would mean even less availability for people back home, I put my name in without the old guilt. And I got it. I started sketching out the after, too. What I'd do when the uniform came off for good. I'd spent a career standing up events on other people's land, signing for other people's celebrations, and somewhere along the way, I developed an eye for it. So I started looking at a small property a couple hours from base. A tired old farmstead with good bones and a barn that clearly wanted to be something. And I started running the numbers on turning it into an event venue of my own. My place. My name on the deed instead of somebody else's reservation. Marissa thought it was poetic and said so, which is the most sentimental she gets. Hank thought it was smart and offered to come pull weeds. I called him every Sunday. I learned slowly how to spend a weekend without a mission, which is harder than it sounds for somebody built like me. And one afternoon, signing a letter of intent on that farmstead, I caught myself grinning at the irony and said it out loud to an empty room. Turns out I'm a hell of a sponsor. I just needed to start sponsoring the right people. The second text from Kayla came 3 months after the wedding, and it was nothing like the first. No defensiveness. No test. No flair. Just this. I finally get it. You weren't absent. You were holding all of us up the whole time, and we called it leaving. I had to lose the thing you gave us just to see that you gave it. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I finally understand. I'm sorry. I read it on the porch of the motel near the farmstead, watching the sun drop behind a barn that was about to be mine. I read it twice. I didn't delete it. I also didn't answer it that night. And here's the part I want to be honest about because it's the whole point. Not answering wasn't revenge and it wasn't strategy. It was simply that I get to choose now. For 35 years, a message from my family was a command, and I responded the way a soldier responds to a command. Immediately. Completely. Before I'd even checked whether the order was lawful or sane. Kayla's apology was real. I could feel that it was real. And I was allowed to sit with a real thing and decide, in my own time, what I wanted to do with it. That's what nobody tells you about boundaries. They don't always end in slammed doors. Sometimes a boundary just means the door has a handle now, and the handle is on your side, and for the first time in your life, you're the one who decides whether it turns. I left the message unanswered, and I went to bed, and I slept all the way through, which I hadn't done anywhere near that family's orbit in years. There's a thing I do at dawn on base, a habit older than most of my friendships. I walk the empty parade field while the light comes up, boots steady on the asphalt, that same even cadence that keeps my hands quiet and my head clear. One of those mornings, I clipped both coins to my lanyard, Hank's and mine, and I thought about my father. I sat down at a picnic table and wrote him a letter. I didn't send it right away. I told him I wasn't waiting for him to be proud of me anymore, and that this wasn't a punishment, it was just the truth. I told him the door wasn't locked, but I wouldn't be standing behind it knocking the way I had my whole life. I told him I'd spent 15 years saying understood, and then obeying, marching to whatever line he and the family drew, and that I'd finally understood something different. Belonging isn't a mission you complete. You can't earn it with enough finished tasks, enough wired money, enough silent folding chairs by the kitchen door. It's either offered or it isn't. And what isn't offered can't be bought, no matter how long you keep paying. I folded the letter and put it in my footlocker, not the trash. The difference between a closed door and a locked one is the whole point. I left it closed. The cadence of my own boots on that empty field. The 2 coins catching the first light. The quiet that for once wasn't surrender but choice. I'd marched my whole life toward a family that kept moving the finish line. That morning, I just stopped marching toward them, turned, and started marching toward the life I actually wanted. Same cadence, different direction. People hear this story and ask if I regret it. The venue, the withdrawal, the call I made at 6:30 in the morning while my family slept, certain I'd fold. No, those contracts and that sponsorship were mine. My name, my signature, my legal responsibility. And the moment they told me I wasn't family was the moment I stopped being obligated to act like one. I didn't blow up a wedding. I removed myself from a document, and the dream they'd built on my back came down because it had never had any other foundation. What I do carry, not regret exactly, more like a lesson with teeth, is the 15 years I spent believing that providing was the same as belonging. That if I just sent enough home, served honorably enough, stayed useful enough from far enough away, the seat would eventually appear. It never appears that way. You cannot buy your way to a place at a table that's decided you don't get on.